Cass Marlowe had always imagined her life would be more exciting. Instead of exploring forgotten realms, chasing after ancient artifacts, or being whisked away to distant worlds, she spent her days cataloging pieces of pottery at the University of Massachusetts Museum of Archaeology. She was good at it, of course. In fact, she was too good at it, which was a bit of a curse. The museum didn't need someone who could decipher hieroglyphics or figure out ancient scripts. What they needed was someone who could correctly label a vase as early Greco-Roman and keep the dust from collecting on the shelves. It was, in a word, boring, and yet, Cassidy Marlowe had no intention of giving up her job. No, instead, she daydreamed about the moment she'd stumble upon some piece of history so groundbreaking it would make Indiana Jones look like a novice. Something legendary. Something like an actual dimensional weapon. That was exactly what Cass thought she was dealing with when a shipment arrived one particularly dreary Tuesday morning. It was supposed to be an old medieval sword. According to the museum's online auction, it was authentic and exceedingly rare. But when Cass opened the box, she nearly choked on the dusty air. The sword wasn't medieval. It was, well, strange. At first glance, it seemed like the kind of artifact a drunk historian might claim to have found in a discount store in Athens. The hilt was adorned with intricate symbols that didn't resemble anything from this world. The blade itself shimmered faintly, like a strip of metal frozen under a moonbeam. Cass's first thought was to dismiss it as a fake. She had seen her fair share of fakes in the museum's storage room. In fact, she prided herself on being able to spot a replica from a mile away. But when she touched the hilt of the sword, something strange happened. The room seemed to tilt, like a drunken carousel. Cass staggered back, her vision flickering. The sword pulsed with an eerie glow, and before she could even scream, she was sucked into a vortex of light. Cass awoke on the ground. Hard, rough ground. A cold breeze swept across her face, and she quickly rolled to her feet, dizzy and disoriented. The air smelled like cinnamon. She blinked and looked around. She was in a vast desert, one that stretched out like a blank canvas of tan sand and jagged rocks. Above her, the sky was a swirling mass of clouds, hues of purple and orange blending into a strange, unnatural color. The world felt like it was wrong. Not in the way that a nightmare felt wrong, but in the way a bad dream does, where something is slightly off, like you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Cass's breath caught in her throat as she stumbled back a few steps. Okay. What the hell is happening? She looked down at her hands, as though they might offer some sort of clue. They were shaking. This wasn't just some bizarre acid trip. This was real. She stood and took a deep breath, her mind racing. The sword. The box. The auction. She hadn't imagined it, had she? No, this was very real. Cass turned and saw the object in her hand, the sword. But it was different now. It was glowing. Softly, faintly, but unmistakably. A voice in her head whispered in an ancient tongue, one she couldn't place. It felt as if the sword itself was calling to her. This can't be good, she muttered, glancing around for any signs of life. What if she'd been transported to a parallel universe? Or worse, a simulation? Hello? She called, but only the wind responded. Suddenly, a loud screeching sound ripped through the air, and Cass whipped her head to the right. She saw something large moving on the horizon, a massive, multi-legged creature, its body covered in scales, its mouth gaping wide as it shrieked into the air. It was heading straight for her. Oh, perfect. Cass took a few frantic steps back, eyes scanning the ground for anything she could use as a weapon. But she wasn't really in the mood to try to reason with an alien sandworm, so when the creature's form got close enough, she gripped the sword with both hands and prepared for impact. It came for her with an immense speed, the ground shaking beneath her feet. At the last second, Cass did what any person would do in her shoes. She swung the sword, and just like that, the world changed. A burst of energy erupted from the sword, sending a shockwave through the desert. The sandworm howled in agony and stopped dead in its tracks. A strange, shimmering force field appeared in front of Cass, protecting her as the creature writhed in pain. The sword was humming now, almost alive, as though it recognized the threat and responded accordingly. The sandworm staggered back and then charged again, but this time, Cass was ready. She raised the sword high, its glow intensifying. With a cry, she swung it downward. The creature disintegrated in front of her eyes, its massive body vanishing into nothingness. Cass stood there, panting, stunned by what had just happened. The sword slowly dimmed in her hand, returning to its original, eerie state. She looked down at the empty space where the sandworm had been and blinked. Okay. Not what I expected. Not at all what I expected. She wasn't sure how she felt. She wasn't even sure if she should be scared. What had just happened? Was she dreaming? Or was this some kind of crazy hallucination? Her thoughts were interrupted when a shadow loomed in the distance. Cass turned, trying to steady her breathing. A group of figures, tall and cloaked in flowing robes, walked towards her. They seemed to float rather than walk, their footsteps eerily silent. Their eyes glowed with a faint blue light, like stars in the night sky. The one at the front, a woman with a glowing face, stepped forward, her voice echoing through the air. You wield the sword of the ancients. Cass narrowed her eyes. Yeah, I'm starting to get that. Then you know of its power, the woman continued, and its dangers. I'm not sure I do, Cass admitted. But I just killed a giant sandworm with it, so, yeah, I guess it's powerful. The woman tilted her head, studying her with an unreadable expression. You are not from this world, are you? No kidding, Cass muttered. I've been transported here by some freaky sword. Well, it's kind of a long story. The woman nodded, her eyes glinting with something that could have been amusement. We are the keepers of the weapons. And you, traveler, are now part of a much larger tale. The woman who stood before Cass was unearthly, and not just because she had glowing eyes and floated instead of walking. There was an aura of ancient wisdom about her, a sense that this was someone who had seen the universe twist and bend in ways that Cass could never begin to understand. Her features were sharp, her skin the color of polished stone, and her voice, when it came again, resonated like a chime from some long-forgotten temple. We are the keepers of the weapons. We have watched over them for eons, she said, her voice somehow both distant and immediate, as if the words came from the depths of the universe itself. But it seems that the time has come for the weapons to be claimed again. And by you, it seems. Cass tightened her grip on the sword, still buzzing faintly in her hand. She didn't know if it was her, or the weapon, that was the cause of the current tension. But the woman's words hit Cass like a weight. She had never wanted any part of this. She had just stumbled onto something far bigger than she'd ever bargained for. I don't know what's going on here, Cass said, doing her best to keep her voice steady. 1 minute, I'm in a museum cataloging dusty old relics, the next I'm being told I'm some chosen one with a weapon capable of disintegrating giant sandworms. All I wanted was a little adventure. And now, apparently, I'm a part of whatever this is. The woman's smile was slow, almost knowing. You are no stranger to adventure, it seems. And fate, traveler, has chosen you for a purpose you cannot yet comprehend. I really don't want to be chosen, okay? Cass snapped, her irritation surfacing. I didn't sign up for this interdimensional scavenger hunt. I just want to go home. And yet, the woman said, her voice barely a whisper in the wind, home may not exist for you anymore. Cass frowned, her frustration deepening. What does that mean? The dimensional rifts have opened. And in their wake, chaos has spread. Your reality, the one you call home, is no longer safe. A force, a man known as Victor Obsidian, hunts the weapons you now wield. He seeks them to reshape reality, to remake it in his image. To make it his dominion. Cass felt the weight of those words settle in her gut. Reality itself, reshaped? A man hunting these weapons? She shook her head, incredulous. And you're telling me I'm supposed to stop him? We cannot, the woman said. The keepers are bound by the ancient laws. Our role is to protect, not to interfere. But you are free to act. You are free to protect your world. But I don't know how to use any of this. Cass argued, gesturing toward the sword. The reality of her situation was beginning to crash down on her. 1 minute, she had been a museum curator living a fairly ordinary life. The next, she was wielding a weapon that could obliterate creatures with a flick of her wrist, in a world where dimensions collided and twisted in strange ways. None of it made sense. The woman's eyes softened for a moment. You will learn, as all wielders of the weapons must. But time is short. Victor Obsidian is already on the move. Great, Cass muttered. Just what I need, an evil genius out to destroy reality and a bunch of weapons I don't know how to use. The woman extended a hand, palm up, and before Cass could register what was happening, a small object appeared in her palm. A tiny, glowing orb, the size of a marble. It pulsed with an internal light, and as Cass reached for it, she felt the faintest hum of energy flow through her fingertips. This is the orb of the sky, the woman explained. It will guide you to your next weapon. It will lead you to the city where you must find the bow of the sky. Cass's eyebrows shot up. Bow? Wait, bow of the sky? Yes, the woman said. There are more. You must collect them. The bow is located in a floating city high above the ocean. It is guarded by the windlords, those who control the currents of air. You will need to gain their trust before you can take the bow. Cass stared at the orb. She was feeling increasingly overwhelmed, but there was something undeniable about the way this all felt. There was no turning back now. Whether she wanted to or not, she was involved in something far bigger than herself. Still, she had no idea what she was supposed to do next. Before she could say anything, the woman spoke again. Go now. The portal to the city will open at the edge of the desert. Do not delay. Cass glanced around, trying to make sense of the desert landscape that stretched endlessly in every direction. The idea of traveling to a floating city seemed impossible, but somehow, the orb seemed to vibrate with the same quiet urgency that filled the air. Fine, she said, already tired of arguing. I'll go find the city, get the bow, and save the world. No big deal. Take care, traveler, the woman said, fading into the shifting sands. The journey will be perilous. Cass walked for what felt like hours, the sun beating down mercilessly as the desert seemed to stretch on forever. She felt the weight of the sword in her hand and the glowing orb at her side. Her thoughts drifted back to her normal life, and the people she had known, her colleagues at the museum, her friends. Would they ever know what happened to her? Would she ever see them again? By the time the first stars began to appear in the sky, the air had turned colder, and she saw it, at the horizon, a shimmer of light, like a mirage, but this time, it wasn't a trick of the heat. The air vibrated with energy, and Cass felt it pull at her chest. She followed the pull, each step taking her closer to the edge of the desert where the landscape shifted, revealing a strange structure, a portal, glowing softly with blue light. She approached cautiously, unsure of what would happen next. As she neared, the orb in her hand pulsed, and the portal rippled like a stone dropped in water. Without hesitation, Cass stepped through. She stumbled onto a new world. The city before her was unlike anything she had ever seen. The buildings floated in midair, suspended by nothing but what seemed to be the very air itself. Bridges made of light connected the floating spires, and the ground below was an ocean of clouds. It was breathtaking. For a moment, Cass forgot everything, the mission, the danger, the weapon, simply staring up at the spectacle in awe. But she quickly snapped out of it. There was no time to waste, her journey had only just begun. Cass stepped cautiously onto the floating city, her boots making no sound as they pressed against the light bridge that connected one of the floating platforms to another. The whole place felt surreal, an ancient marvel of engineering, as if it were made of pure imagination. The towers, made of shining crystal and shimmering metal, rose from clouds that glowed with a faint, ethereal light. The air here was thin but crisp, tinged with a fresh, salty breeze that came from the open sky. Her eyes were wide, the scope of it almost too much for her mind to process. If her brain hadn't already been overloaded with the ridiculousness of the situation, this might have been enough to send her spiraling. The city was alive. She could feel the hum beneath her feet, almost like the pulse of a beating heart, the energy of the floating spires seeming to vibrate in sync with the world around her. It was like walking through a dream, but the dream was dangerous, so dangerous that every breath felt like it might be her last. "You've made it," came a voice, low and breathy. Cass whipped around to see a woman standing a few paces behind her. She was tall, with a posture that was both regal and unerringly perfect. Her eyes were pale blue, so light that they almost looked white in the dimming light of the sky. Her hair flowed like wind-blown clouds, but when Cass blinked, the woman was already standing closer, her feet making no sound against the glowing surface of the bridge. The woman smiled at her, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to the Skyhold, the City of Winds," the woman said, her voice soft but commanding. "You've come for the bow of the sky, I presume?" Cass didn't trust her immediately. There was something unsettling about the way the woman had appeared so suddenly, as if she were a part of the city itself. She nodded slowly, keeping a firm grip on the sword at her side. "I need to find the bow. There's a man hunting for weapons, dimensional weapons. He's dangerous, and I need to stop him." The woman's lips twitched, barely an expression. "You speak of Victor Obsidian." Cass stiffened. "You know him?" "We know of him," the woman replied, her tone laced with an air of quiet authority. "He has been a thorn in our side for many cycles. He seeks the weapons, yes. But the bow of the sky is not something easily taken. It requires more than force. It requires the trust of the Wind Lords." "The Wind Lords?" Cass raised an eyebrow. "How do I gain their trust?" The woman's gaze softened, though only slightly. "You must prove yourself worthy. The bow is not just a weapon, it is a conduit, a piece of the sky itself. Only those who are chosen may wield it." Cass felt the weight of those words settle over her. She wasn't chosen for anything. She was just Cass. The woman with an absurdly dangerous sword who had no clue what she was doing. She had no idea how she could prove herself worthy of anything, let alone something as grand as the bow of the sky. "What kind of test are we talking about?" she asked, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The woman's eyes glittered. "The Wind Lords will test your ability to survive in this world. To prove your worth, you must master the currents, understand the winds, and perhaps, understand yourself." Cass frowned. "And if I fail?" "If you fail, the city will not allow you to leave. You will remain here, lost among the clouds. Forever." "Great. No pressure." "Okay, let's say I'm in," Cass said, her voice more defiant than she felt. "Where do I start?" The woman extended a hand, gesturing toward a large, swirling vortex of air that seemed to hang in the air like a giant, invisible whirlpool. "Follow the wind." Cass didn't need to be told twice. She walked toward it without hesitation, drawn by the pull of the strange vortex that seemed to breathe in and out with a life of its own. As she approached, the air grew colder, the wind sharper, tugging at her clothes as if trying to push her back. "This is the trial of winds," the woman called after her, her voice carrying across the space. "If you can navigate the winds and make it to the center, you will prove your worth. But be warned, it is not as simple as it appears." Cass barely had time to respond before the air seemed to swallow her whole. The wind was relentless. Cass's feet barely touched the glowing bridge before the vortex pulled her in, sucking her upward into a spiral of air so fast she felt as though she might be torn apart. Her hair whipped around her face, and the world blurred into streaks of blue and white. She tried to stay calm, tried to steady her breathing as she was sucked deeper into the storm. She stretched her arms out to stabilize herself, gripping nothing but the cold, invisible forces around her. The wind screamed in her ears, its pressure intense, pushing her this way and that, forcing her body to twist in impossible directions. She could hear the roar of the wind, feel it clawing at her, but she held tight to the sword, feeling its familiar weight. Despite everything, despite the swirling chaos around her, Cass knew one thing: she wasn't going down without a fight. Focus. Cass closed her eyes for a split second, clearing her mind. She recalled the sword, the way it had felt when she swung it at the sandworm. That moment had been instinct. She hadn't thought, she had just acted, and now, the wind was the enemy. The way to survive this was the same: don't think too much. Just act. The sword hummed, and she swung it forward, channeling the energy that seemed to pulse through her veins. At first, nothing happened. But then, slowly, the wind responded. Cass felt the energy in the sword resonate with the vortex, and she realized something. The weapon wasn't just a tool, it was an extension of her. She was connected to it in a way that went beyond logic, beyond science. It was a part of her now. The air slowed, as if it were obeying her command, and with a newfound sense of control, Cass pushed herself forward. She felt the current around her shift, guiding her, letting her slip through it like a fish through water. The tunnel of air opened up before her, its pressure easing as she passed through, her body still tense but now moving with purpose. Ahead of her, the storm parted just enough to reveal a floating platform, surrounded by dozens of winged figures. They were the Windlords, guardians of the bow. The moment they saw her, they stopped, silent, watching her with eyes that gleamed like shards of ice. Cass landed on the platform with a light thud, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know how long she had been in the storm, or how she had made it through, but the moment she stepped onto the platform, the wind stopped completely. The air settled, the pressure lifting as if the vortex had never existed. The Windlords hovered in place, their wings fluttering softly in the now calm air. One of them, a figure dressed in robes that shimmered like the sky at dawn, spoke in a voice that was both warm and chilling. "You have passed the trial," the figure said. "You have earned the right to wield the bow of the sky." Cass stood still, trying to catch her breath. What's next? The Windlord extended a hand, and a shimmering bow appeared in the air before Cass. It looked like nothing she had ever seen, a delicate, translucent arc that pulsed with energy, the string of it made from pure light. She reached for it, and the moment her fingers brushed the cool surface, she felt an overwhelming rush of power flood through her. The bow of the sky. It was hers now, and with it, the fight to save her world was just beginning.